Welcome to Charting New Paths in Pre-K through 12 Education, a podcast by Solution Tree. In our authors segment, we invite our new and best-selling authors published by Solution Tree to share their expertise and valuable insights with you. Listen to this segment and add another tool in your toolbox of research-affirmed, classroom-ready strategies to improve student outcomes. I'm your host, Prisma Lopez Marin. Enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone. In today's episode, the book we'll be talking about is titled Raising Equity Through SEL, a framework for implementing trauma-informed, culturally responsive teaching and restorative practices. This book establishes a 5-step equity and SEL integration framework and dives into research-backed strategies for engaging with students of all backgrounds and building classrooms safe for all learners. We were joined by the author of this book, Jorge Valenzuela. He is an education coach, an author, and a professor at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. And he's also the lead coach at Lifelong Learning Defined. He has years of experience as a teacher, curriculum specialist, and consultant. Using action research methodology, his work helps school leaders and teachers reach their unique success paths to innovation in school leadership, tiered instruction, project-based learning, computer science and STEM education, and social and emotional learning across the curriculum. Additionally, he facilitates workshops throughout the country on behalf of Solution Tree and the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development. Jorge, thank you for joining me for this episode.
Thank you, Prisma. It's really weird to hear someone say all of that about me. I don't even remember half of that stuff. I do want to say though, my name is actually pronounced George. It is spelled Jorge, and there's a reason for that. Maybe I can share that real quick.
Yeah.
My dad's name is George, spelled with a G, and he passed away. But in the 1970s, he was in the military in Panama, and he met my mom, who's from Colombia. And you know what happened there? And she ended up having me in New York City. And she wanted to name me after my dad, which is George with a G, but she didn't know how to spell it in English, so she wrote it in Spanish, but she'd always called me George. And so the funny part about the story is that my whole life, all in like throughout K through 12, I always spelled it George with a G. But when I did my FAFSA, they wrote me a letter saying that's not your name. So professionally, I go by Jorge or spelled with a J, but in my personal life is with a G, George.
Oh, nice. That's such a great story.
Yeah, people really get a kick out of that. They're like, oh, wow, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Could you also share with us more about your current role in education?
Yeah, so right now I'm an education author, advocate, I'm a coach. And as an author, I get to write on several different topics. I've written about STEM, about computer science, in the context of robotics, project-based learning, in the context of environmental science, and now equity and SEL. And the reason why is because my work with schools that I partner with and also school systems is action research. So we're taking a topic that we want to study and we're collecting data as we go along, and we're developing new ways or improving old ways of doing something, innovation, instructional innovation. And so part of that work is to do some scholarly service and to do some research that's in journals, articles that are on Edutopia, on ISTE, so that other educators can also experience success. I also like to advocate. So I also go to Washington sometimes and I speak to my representatives here in Virginia, like our senators, our congressmen and women, and speak about what works in education so they know what we're doing, number one, but number two, how they can allocate funding and they can make really better decisions about what happens in education.
So tell us more about your previous teaching experience in K through 12 and then also in STEM. So particularly, I noticed when I was looking at information about you, about the STEM leadership project that connected both academic and CTE, K through 12 classrooms to higher education and the workforce, which is really important to make all of that connection together.
Yeah, so I started out as a computer science undergrad. So my undergrad was at SUNY Old Westbury in New York. It's called Business Information Technology. And I learned about computer science and about business. When I became a teacher in Virginia, I got endorsed in computer science because that was an endorsement, but there were no computer science classes. So I was put into tech ed or technology education. And around that time in 2003, 4, there was a shift towards engineering and STEM. STEM actually came out in 2008, but there was a shift there on showing young people how to problem solve with technology, but in the context of engineering. So I went back to school. I got into the NASA program at Columbia University, and I learned about engineering design and about scientific principles. And so when you're designing like let's say a race car or robots, things like that, you are using computer science because in essence you're using a design process, but you're also using computational thinking and sometimes even coding and programming so you can solve a computational problem. So I started doing that. And around 2007, I became the supervisor in my school district, Richmond City Public Schools, for all the schools, for any teacher that's doing STEM and computer science at the time. And I was doing work where I realized that we had to showcase the work of young people. It's not just about what we say as educators, it's about young people showcasing their STEM projects and their engineering projects in meaningful ways that help them connect higher education, but also the workforce. And so I would work with other teachers that were developing these young people, and we would showcase all these talents. I was invited back in 2017 by our Senator Tim Kaine, and him, along with some other folks, other senators, they worked on a bipartisan bill. It's called the CTE Excellence and Equity Act. And so I had to go and speak at the Senate and speak about the intersection of academics, of career skills in STEM, but how they tie into the workforce and into higher education. And so the bill, I don't believe it was passed, but if you do Google Tim Kaine and the CTE Excellence Equity Act, I do have a statement that they took from me at the time. And so I'm very proud about that.
And you should be. There's a lot of work that should still be more towards STEM and making that connection with the students as well. And then just providing that access for students to see that STEM is important, that they can prevail and have careers in that area.
Yeah, I believe firmly that high schools in the United States should have a career theme. They don't have to be STEM, but we know there's a lot of STEM jobs. In fact, I heard a stat from the BLS that says that 69% of all new STEM jobs are in computing. And so these jobs are available and they're out there. And so I think schools need to find a way to make pathways to those jobs.
So in 2021, you were awarded with the Make It Happen Award from ISCE, so the International Society for Technology and Education. Tell us more about that. And then how would you describe the significance of technology in today's education?
Yeah, so ISTE is an organization that I'm so proud to be a member, number one, but number two, I became an author through ISTE. In fact, we wouldn't be here talking right now if it weren't for ISTE and the folks over there. I began as, I want to say, a blogger, right? Like I would write articles for them about STEM and computer science, about robotics, and I became an author with them. And I started to get a lot of inquiries about my work around 2017, which is when I formed Lifelong Learning Defined. Previously, I had been a PBL coach and a computer science and STEM coach or instructional specialist, and I would go around the country through other organizations and I would do that for them. But when I started working with ISTE and I started to put my work out there, I started getting a lot of inquiries. And so I started to get invited to do coaching. And when I showed them that I would do the coaching through action research, where we're all learning all together and we are collecting data and we're developing new frameworks and new models, then what started happening was that those became books. And because they were learned on a very deep level, I started to take pieces of the books and just repurpose them into articles and blog posts for Edutopia, ISTE, back in the day on PBL Works and other orgs. But what I didn't know was that all this stuff was accumulating. And there's a lot of stuff out there now. And in 2021, I was invited by the leadership at ISTE for a meeting on SEL and ed tech. And I went into the meeting thinking, it was about that. But the Making It Happen Award is an award that you get and you don't know that you've been nominated, which that made it super extra special because I didn't know, right? Like it's not like an award where you signed up for it or your friend told you, well, I've nominated you. No, it's super secret. They invite you into a meeting and you don't know what's going on. And so they start the meeting. And Joseph South, that he's one of the big wigs over there. He started speaking, and they just said, George, you've been awarded. And I should have known because a lot of my collaborators, a lot of my friends, a lot of my clients, they were in the meeting, which that should have told me something. I thought it was weird, who's who of people in my life, but I thought nothing of it, right? Like a lot of people are ISTE members. So I was like, okay, I'll just go with this. And they made me cry.
Wow.
It's a very big honor. And as you know, educational technology is really important for augmenting instruction. So we're not leading with technology, but we're using technology with what we know from the learning sciences in order to improve instructional outcomes for all young people.
Right. Wow, that's so powerful that they had that impact. They have an impact on a lot of scholars.
Oh, yeah. And actually, this book, I think it's the first time in the history of Solution Tree that it's a co-pub with ISTE. And that makes me really happy because I'm so super proud. Like I was part of a PLC training back in the day with Solution Tree. And I was just like, wow, that is like an organization that one day I want to write a book for, I want to do PD for, but ISTE is my home. So to see these two worlds align and to be part of my book, which I think this book, which we'll get into in a moment, right? It's a very important book, probably the most important book I'll ever do. It just makes me just so proud, so incredibly happy to know that people that I want to say have provided me the opportunity to be here are all like working together now on my
Right.
behalf. So I'm super grateful.
You brought that bridge. You connected. You made that connection. It was you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Actually, tell us more about your experience with Solution Trees, your first interaction. So you said PLC.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, oh my God. So when I was at Richmond City Public Schools, our school system, well, in the beginning, we were on point. We had our superintendent, we had our director of CNI, we were doing what we had to do. In 2010, we got all schools fully accredited. You can Google that. 2010, all 50 of our PS schools were fully accredited. And our instructional team, we actually did that through something called learning walks, where we would go every 9 weeks and we would visit all of our schools. We learned our teachers, we learned our staff, and we personalized our PD solutions, which is what I do in my work now. Everything is personalized, which you saw in the book. But anyway, around 2017, there started to be a shift where we got new leadership, things like that. And so they were trying different things. And so Solution Tree training was one of the ones that I attended right before I left. And I was super impressed with a lot of the protocols that were being used in the PLCs and just ways of structuring conversations and structuring practice that's research based and evidence based that needs to happen in schools. So that was my first interaction. Now, my second interaction was with Sarah Jabbar, who's no longer at Solution Tree, but she reached out on Twitter. She got in my DMs and she reached out and she said, George, I see you're writing a lot of stuff and I would love to work with you. Can we jump on Zoom so we can talk about how that might happen? And so we had a conversation, and I would have to say, when I did like 3 or 4 articles on equity and SEL, and I really thought that that was my contribution. I didn't see a whole book, right? I didn't think that, first of all, I thought that it is an important topic. I had been working on it before the pandemic on a personal level, but I never thought that this would be something that would remain in education. Nor did I think that it would be a hot topic where other pedagogies that would fit into an SEL plan are now being under fire and under question. So I talked to her. I had a vision for another book where SEL would be included, right? Emotional intelligence. But I had a different book. And she said, look, George, that could be the next book. Right now, education needs this.
Mm.
So she just had a great outline and a great way of looking at it. And she convinced me. And then I started working with y'all. And honestly, and you can read the book, like I just wrote about what I was doing
Mm.
and what we were discovering. And because it became such a hot topic in education, I was being invited to speak about it everywhere.
Yeah.
And it became a thing where I collected more data. I learned more. I also made more mistakes, but we learn from the mistakes, right?
Right.
That's part of the process. And so it just became a book that I hope it's an evergreen resource because right now we've been doing SEL. So not a lot of the stuff, but some of the stuff that's the foundational knowledge, a lot of people already know, but some people don't. So I'm hoping that it's a book that you can pick up on anywhere you are in your SEL plan, in your SEL journey, and you can start from there, learn new stuff, maybe take stuff you've already done and just tweak it, make it better. And I hope that my book is a great resource for that.
I agree. I definitely could see that being such a horizon for many people who do want to implement something like this. So now let's get into your book here, Raising Equity Through SEL. Walk us through the 5-step equity and SEL integration framework.
Yeah, so I do want to say this. There's a framework that is in steps, and it's not to be confused with the Castle framework. The Castle framework is a behavioral framework which focuses on self, right? Self-awareness, social awareness, but also responsible decision making. So that is in my framework, but it's not what my framework is about entirely. So the framework was developed because, well, through action research back in 2020. There's a school system called Hereford County Public Schools. I want to give a shout out to Tammy Ward and to Dr. William Wright and to Mrs. D. Biggers. They were working with me previously on STEM and computer science, but then we got into curriculum and instruction because they saw that some of the things I was working on was not just about STEM and computer science, but on integrating STEM and computer science into instruction, tier 1, 2, and 3, MTSS. Well, anyway, make a long story short, NC State, in partnership with DPI, which is Department of Public Instruction in North Carolina, they developed a framework for distance learning. And in the framework, equity and SEL were a big part of the framework, and we needed to understand how to integrate that into our online lessons. And so this is a school system that is very rural and it's small. It's like 7 schools. And so the reason why SEL was so important was because there were young people that before the pandemic, they were getting food at the school. So now they had to stop instruction for a short time and do drop-offs. And a lot of the kids, they didn't have Wi-Fi at the time. So we had to do learning packets. So think about that. Think of the isolation and how upset some young people were at the time and what they were going through. And so we had to find a way to get everyone online, but then we had to figure out how to do emotions check-ins for really getting them prepared to learn, but not lose a lot of instructional focus. And so it took us 2-3 months where only the first, fourth, and fifth step were in place. And it wasn't even meant to really be a framework. So the first step is this, is to understand the basics of the Castle 5, is the 5 competencies, right? It's just to understand self-awareness for self-management, social awareness for relationship skills, and responsible decision making. So for each of those things, we had little frameworks or little things that we can help the young people with, which was the emotions check-in, where if I'm triggered based on my computer not working, based on something that's happening, how do I now self-regulate by finding out what my emotion is and finding a strategy to be at peace so I can get back to learning. Well, that was the first step. And then the fourth step is to help them with their emotional intelligence skills. Because if you think about SEL, what we're trying to do is improve EQ skills, emotional intelligence skills. And then lastly is to activate that into our lessons. And so the emotions check-in was just really just a formative assessment that we would use as needed whenever someone in our classrooms is struggling with either the learning goal of the day, the final product that they're working on in the classroom, a current event, or if something happened. Well, after George Floyd, there was a need to now think about what we believe about our kids and for helping them see, here's the thing. How can we help someone understand themselves, their environment, and other people if we don't understand ourselves? And so that became a broader conversation with the superintendent, other school leaders, like principals, lead teachers. And so there was a need to now focus, because we were doing action research and we were collecting data. We realized that in order for SEL to really be implemented right, there was some self-work that the adults had to do first. And so the first step, which in the book is to understand the basics of the Castle Five, it now became to understand the basics of the Castle Five, but also the basics of emotional intelligence for you.
Right.
And you see, here's the thing. You can be a lead learner if we're learning a new technology tool, right? If we're learning a new concept, because these are, physical things. We're seeing them and we're putting our hands on them. But emotions are internal. So you can't be a lead learner. You can't pass on emotional intelligence to a young person or to a family member or to a friend if we don't have that ourselves. And so there became a need, to understand emotions on a deeper level. It turns out that our emotions are experienced based on our life experiences. So, for example, like are, Prisma, and you live in Indiana, and and an emotion that you experience is fear or sadness. I'm George. I'm from Far Rockaway, Queens, New York, and I live in Virginia. I also experience fear and sadness the same way you do, but my triggers are different because my life experience is different. And also, you might have had an adult in your life that coached you through fear and anxiety and sadness. So you had a better way of coping and dealing with it and getting back to learning than maybe I did. Maybe I didn't have that family. I didn't have that support. And so I had to learn that the hard way. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so every teacher has to understand their own emotional trauma, has to check their own biases, right? Especially if you're working with other people, especially young people that are from a different background, a different culture, a different generation. And so that leads into step two, is to understanding what we believe about our kids. And that's an important thing. And so that's where the topic of bias, implicit bias, which are biases that we don't know that we have, right? That are based on society or based on our culture or based on what we see on TV, things like that. And so it's just doing a self-check. And then when certain hot topics were happening in the world that we couldn't ignore at the time, then we had to look into reputable resources, especially if our staff and our students are now being impacted about what's happening on the news and on social media. And so what the book has is structures and ways of unpacking that information in a way that's very respectful, that allows everyone in the school to speak from the heart, but also get feedback when they do that, when it's not effective, right? And to also listen from the heart and things like that. And so the third step is to, now that we've worked on our own emotional intelligence, we understand what the Castle framework is, we know what we believe about the kids, now we have to use our knowledge of students to inform our instruction. There's a lot of research that says that it's not just about knowing young people as learners. It's also about knowing them as individuals and as people. And so and I know some people don't want to hear this, but if I'm teaching young people that belong to a different background, then I have to get more culturally competent.
Right. Yeah.
And hopefully proficient about who they are as people so that I can connect with them. And so empathy is a big part of chapter 3 and a big part of that step, because I really do believe this, and I can't prove this, but think about it. The prerequisite to any relationship, I think, has to be empathy. There's a lot of people in the adult world that love each other, that are in relationships, but where there is no empathy, it's not really harmonious. It's not really happy. And sometimes it doesn't even work out. And so leading with empathy, the empathy map, which I know everyone has seen online, the article and the Edutopia video, is just a big part of sitting down as either an individual teacher or in a teaching team and getting on the same page about a learner by looking at their interests and goals, their assets, right? Or what they're good at. And then the 3 buckets of learning that I've seen that are relevant in education: academic learning, career learning, and social emotional learning. So just having that one pager on a student that needs us the most and getting everyone in the building on the same page about that kid, that's a very valuable thing. So we have 3 things so far, and we're getting to 5. First thing is to understand the basics of the Castle 5, emotional intelligence for myself. Second step is, what do I believe about my kids? Knowing what I do believe about them and correcting what is not right. Third is to know them so I can make better instructional decisions and raise equity for them. And also, oh, I forgot to say this, is that our kids have diverse needs. And what works for one kid is variable. Well, it's not always variable, that it'll work the next day or the next day or for every other kid, right? So you've got some young kids that have a lot of trauma. So we have to be trauma informed so that we don't re-traumatize them and that we know what the look fors are in dealing with them so we can make better learning partnerships. 2, which I talked about as being culturally relevant, is to know our kids so that everyone in the class feels heard, seen, represented in the curriculum. But also, young people have disagreements sometimes. And so sometimes we have to restore justice. And so these are, different pedagogies. This book does not replace all of those trainings or anything like that, but it lifts up practices from those pedagogies with the research, which is a little bit in there, but it's mostly on the practices that do align to SEL and can be implemented in your SEL plan. And then the 4th and 5th step, as we discussed earlier, is once we know this stuff, then we can help young people with their emotional intelligence skills. And then we can activate it in our lessons as needed instead of stopping to do SEL.
Right. So this book does focus a lot on emotional intelligence and culturally responsive teaching. Would you say would you say this is crucial towards students' cognitive development?
Oh yeah, because see, like the thing is this, the human brain, it doesn't fully develop until around the age of 25.
Right.
And so people that have practiced at cognition, they have high cognition, high levels of cognition. They know how to problem solve. They tend to make decisions from the rational part of the brain, right? Like just the prefrontal cortex. But young people, teens, young adults, that may not have this skill, like they know how to make decisions, but they don't necessarily know how to make responsible ones because they tend to make decisions from the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain, which can be hijacked, which is meant for fight or flight. And so therefore, young people have to learn that self-awareness for self-management, that social awareness for their relationship skills. It's got to be taught. And so I believe, and through our action research, we have proven that it can be taught in your lessons, in your PBL units, in your projects, in your performance tasks. It doesn't have to be a thing where we're stopping to learn these things, but they have to be learned. It's not just about being a better learner, being a better worker, it's being a better citizen, being a better person. So that's what we're trying to do.
Right. I agree. I absolutely agree. So, what have you seen in the field in education that encouraged you to write this book, or any personal experience that might apply to that?
All right, so it was illusion tree all the way writing the book. But as far as my personal experience, I'd say Oof. I I didn't know my father, personally. My mom wasn't always there in my life. And so I spent some time in the foster care system. I was in a group home. And I had to learn a lot of things on my own. And I had to go through life on my own, a lot of my early adulthood. And so there was a lot of emotional trauma and pain that I would just hide. See, what I didn't know was that when when a little kid is experiencing trauma or emotional pain, if they don't have an adult there that can coach them through those things, right? And through understanding what emotions are, then what happens is that they tend to block it out as a defense mechanism. So I did that. And here's the thing, when you're an adult and you try to do that through parties, through relationships, there comes a time where you have to feel it to heal it. And so I started to do that work on myself around the age of 36. I'm 47 now. And I discovered a lot of great books like Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth, um, the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And so I started to get frameworks and tools for how to discover who I am and how to really be at peace with myself. And as a father, I have a couple of teenagers around 2017, 2018, when they started getting older. I started realizing that whenever I would say or do something that they don't like, that they don't agree with, they would ignore me and pay me no never mind. Educators out there, you know what I'm talking about. It's very painful, especially when it's your own kids. And so I knew that I had some learning gaps. Now, I didn't know it was emotional intelligence. I had no idea, but I had already been learning about emotions and about pain and trauma and healing. And so one day I was reading an article on making first impressions by Dr. Travis Bradbury. And I think this is in the book. I'm pretty sure it is. And in the article, he talked about emotional intelligence, which is a book that he co-wrote with Gene Greaves. And I got the book and it came with an emotional intelligence appraisal, which I took online around 2018, 2019, early 2019, and I scored a 74. And in scoring a 74, it pinpointed exactly where I was lacking. And so it turns out that my kids were being turned off by me when I would rant for 20 to 30 minutes, when I'm off topic, when I'm comparing them between each other and other people, right? So I learned that instead of ranting for 20, 30 minutes, to sit down and write down in 3, 4 sentences what I want to say. It turns out that not just young people, but all people resent it when you give unsolicited feedback. I also learned that you have to be kind, specific, and helpful, which is a page out of Ron Berger's book, when you are given feedback. So yeah, I started working on it, and I can honestly say, I never thought, if someone would have told me that I would do some action research with a school system and then be asked to speak about it all over the country and now do a book on it, I would have never believed them. But here's the thing, you have to, if you're running a business, if you're working with people, I've learned this, you have to focus on their pain points. You have to focus on the need. It's even better when that is something that you already have some expertise in, because now you have some expertise, they have some expertise, you blend that and you do action research, right? So you're looking at what's been done, you're tweaking what's been done, you're trying it out, you are collecting data, you are making mistakes, but you are learning. Then sometimes you get a whole new framework. And so here's the thing. As an educator, we don't just only podcast what we're working on, but we write articles about it, how-to blogs. So when I wrote those articles on SEL and equity and those things back in 2020, which was a long time ago now, I never thought that, ISTE would ask me to speak at their Summer Learning Academy. And when I never did a featured speakers job before. I always did workshops. And my net promoter score at the time was like a 91 from 2014 all the way until 2020. So I was confident that I would do a good job, but I had never done that job. So I had to be coached and to learn how in 1 hour in a webinar, explain my work. 15,000 people registered for it. The hashtag blew up that night. And so I started getting invitations to independent schools, charter schools, universities to now talk about this. And so I got to collect a lot more data just outside of that school system. And that's what you see in the book. It's all those experiences. And because a lot of people may not be interested in that, but some people are, in the appendices, we actually added an extra chapter explaining that action research and how everything developed. Because I think it's important for schools and other consultants to realize that knowledge is developed like it is in the graduate program. It's through research.
Right.
Yeah. And so when you learn it that way, you learn it on a very deep level. And then not only can you implement it, but you can explain it to other people through your articles, through your work, through your podcast, your webinar. And you know what? Somebody might understand it better. But that's what scholarly service is all about. It's about taking what we've learned, sharing it with the world so we can improve our profession, but also outcomes for young people and for teachers.
I appreciate you sharing with us. That's very powerful. Your life experience has actually made such a huge influence in not just this book, but just your overall approach to everything. And so it will be huge to someone who truly needs it as a student. It's just going to be an completely overwhelming focus for them to feel like, oh, my teacher is really acknowledging me. Like I am actually present to my teacher who is using this framework. Obviously, they don't know about this framework as students, but you get what I mean. Like they will feel that if a teacher does implement this such framework for their work.
Rory Vaden, who's the CEO of Skills Builders, I think that's the name of it. He said, "You are perfectly positioned to help the person that you used to be."
Wow. Yeah,
I mean, that says
exactly.
it all right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if you can sum up George Valenzuela and my work, it's that. So if I'm at a school and they want to do STEM, if they want to do computer science, if they want to do PBL, I'm like, hey, let's look at the classroom. Let's see what's going on. Let's do our research first. And now let's start in our work. That way it's research informed, it's evidence based, and we're learning as we go along. Like one of the things that I think is crazy is when people start a new initiative in a school system and there's no book study. Right? It's just let's implement this how it is, as is. And I just think that that's not right. And one of the things that I've spoken with Solution Tree about is to now do this workshop, if folks want to do it, through action research by looking at the classroom, seeing what's going on, implementing the framework, and then updating, tweaking and taking the things that we need from it and making it better.
Good. I'm excited for that, to hear the feedback, but then also to hear your input on how it goes. So the book has a captivating authority to strengthen equity in the classrooms. How can this book start conversations towards equity through SEL, specifically to if there is any pushback on any of this at all?
Yeah, so emotional intelligence is the foundation for this whole framework and for this whole book, right? Is being emotionally intelligent and congruent in my beliefs and in the belief that young people and that my colleagues are important as I do my work, right? In a classroom, a lot of times we're siloed, but the kids aren't siloed. They get to see all of us. And so we have to be interdependent with our colleagues and with our students. And so I know that in some places, some of the topics that I guess are uplifted in the book may be banned or they may be taboo to speak about. And so I'd say is never break the rules where you're at, right? Don't introduce something that isn't going to work. I think that in spaces where people do want to talk about these things, I think it's important that they make some shared agreements. And I know that's in the book. You make shared agreements about how you want to do equity work or opportunity work, right? The new word is opportunity in my state, is raising opportunity for young people, right? And so you have to make agreements about how you're going to do that work so that every voice is heard, but every voice at the same time also is willing to do what's in the best interest of our colleagues and our students. And so the book really does not shy about that, like or shy away from that. It does address the elephant in the room. I guess folks have to read it, but I would definitely, in spaces where you can't speak about it or you can't actively do the work, I would just say is to look at the book and just see how you're showing up and how you're interacting with people, and always work with those that want to work with you. I think it's important. But also, there's certain things that I don't think we'll ever have an answer for. I mean, we are really polarized, right? In our country. I mean, if you think back to in the beginning of COVID, it was to learn distance learning, right? And we were learning, but some kids still didn't have Wi-Fi. Not every kid had a device. And so there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty. Then once we got that, then we had to make a decision. You max or don't max. Then you mask or don't mask. You're all the way right politically or all the way left, right? Now we have inflation that's going through the roof. Now we're in recession, the 20th one in our country. So we know for 18 months, there's a lot of uncertainty, like it was in 2020, just on a different scale. So I think that for us, we always have to improve our pedagogical strategies, how we plan lessons and how we facilitate them. But at the same time, we have to work on ourselves as people. I'm really impressed by the entrepreneur or by the educator that's not just a great teacher or great at the services that they are providing, but also, are they a good husband? Are they a good wife? Are they a good partner? Are they a good father, mom, right? Are they good in their investments? Are they not just a seven-figure earner, but are they a seven-figure person? It's something to think about. So I think in the uncertainty we do the work as best as we can within our span of control, but we have to work on ourselves, not just our pedagogy.
In chapter 9, the book addresses the marginalization effects on learning, which I really appreciated. It made me think a lot of my own experience. I'm like, wow, that really does hit home to some of these things. So for some students, this is very major, specifically if they're marginalized. Can you elaborate on those effects, and how can this book guide teachers to enhance their SEL teaching plans to establish equity in classrooms?
Yeah, so in the book, there's links to resources that are for a lot of different marginalized groups in the United States that we see in classrooms, right? But it specifically addresses the four that I saw in the data that need the most equity raised. And so the FBI says that the two groups that experience the most hate are African Americans and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And so those topics are addressed with very compelling data to why it's important to have these conversations and to how to do them in a respectful way for improving outcomes of students and staff, but also LGBTQ students or those that identify as LGBTQ. There is data that's in the book. It's from the Trevor Project that really talks about how marginalized a lot of our LGBTQ students feel. And so I think it's important that that's also addressed if that's in our context. And then lastly, immigrants and refugees. There is a difference, and a lot of them are going through a lot, like with Ukraine, the Afghan refugees. And so if they're showing up in our classrooms, then we have to raise equity for them. But here's the whole thing. In chapter 9, it really addresses that there's research that shows that when professors, that when teachers and policymakers and other people as well, when they actively do work that's inclusive of the diversity that's in their space, then you'll see young people that have been historically marginalized or who feel marginalized, because there is a difference. I am from historically marginalized populations, but at the same time, I could be very confident, but then when I walk into a classroom or into a space, I could be made to feel isolated or
Right.
like
Yeah.
or like I'm not important, right? So
Yeah.
that is a form of being marginalized. And so there's research that shows that when educators take the time to work on that, then what happens is this: everyone starts to feel a sense of belonging. Not only are we improving academic outcomes and academic achievement and engagement, but we're also making people feel better and have more self-confidence and have better SEL.
Right. Oh. That's so good. I appreciate that distinction. So, in a previous conversation that we had, you mentioned that it was important to learn how to better connect with young people, students. How can this book define the valuable connection educators may create or build if they implement this framework, but also celebrate diversity?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to something that Zaretta Hammond said. She said this in an ASCD article, which I just thought was just super relevant to all of education. She said this: what we should be doing in the classroom is trying to form learning partnerships with young people. However, well, the purpose of the learning partnership is to give them the algorithms and the problem solving strategies that they need in order to be successful, not just academically, but as people. But how do you do that if you don't establish a relationship first? And how do you establish a relationship where there is no empathy? Meaning we have to get to know our kids the way they are from their perspective, is knowing them as learners, but as individuals, as people. And sometimes that means that I have to make a little more effort if I'm teaching young people that are different than me, have a different background, have a different culture, have different, beliefs, values, and a different generation, right? And so that's what we're talking about, is figuring out where are the disconnections and turn them into connections, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so important because this is the next generation that we're placing out in the world, and the agents of change are our teachers who provide that influence in who we're gonna essentially, obviously, our parents. But what if we don't have influential parents, or what if we didn't grow up, depending on who you grew up with? But then, if not them, then it's definitely your educators who provide that role model as who you are going to become in the world.
Yeah, so I've been to about 25 states. I want to say over 70 cities in our country, and I'm finding more and more, and I can't prove this, but just in conversations with a bunch of educators over the last, decade, that teachers in a lot of young people's lives are the most consistent adult
Wow.
because they see them 8 hours of the day in a controlled environment, whereas in the other 16 hours of the day, they may not be around other adults for the whole time, right? So that's something to really consider. It's a big job, and I know that for a lot of teachers, we're realizing that systems may be broken in our spaces, in our districts. We're realizing it's not our fault. People are speaking up about it. Some people are even leaving. And I just think that for those of us that do remain in education, we have to consider our young people, but we also have to consider ourselves. James Spencer says that educators need to consider whether they're tired or they're injured. So they have to think about, what do I need? It's 4 R's: rest, recovery, restoration, or rehabilitation. So it's not just about helping young people and doing everything for them, but nothing for ourselves. No, it's a fine tandem of doing both, because you can't pour from the empty cup.
Mhm. Right. That's good. I like that. No, lastly, I could continue this conversation, but lastly, I do want to respect your time. What is your advice for teachers to take this to their education leadership so that the book's knowledge, research, and framework can succeed in schools and districts?
Yeah, I think it's important for first, schools need to really consider What is it that you're trying to do in regards to SEL? And sometimes they're not sure what type of questions to ask. And so a book like this really outlines step by step of how you can start. Now, each of the steps, it does provide tangible strategies and resources and worksheets and things that you can do, or I'd say templates. But at the same time, you have to know your context, who's in the classroom, you have to know who's on staff. And so you have to personalize, maybe take the practices, but tweak them to put them in the context of who's in the room. I'm a very big proponent of speaking to the room. It's not about hearing myself speak. It's not about saying, well, he's really smart or they're really smart. No, it's about how do we raise equity through SEL for young people as needed and for our colleagues as well.
I like that inclusion of providing it as a bigger picture of both the student and the teacher, not just obviously our focus is for our students and their learning, but it's also important to take care of our educators as well.
Right. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for such an informative conversation about all of this, about how to activate social emotional learning effectively in your classrooms with this framework. It was very informative. I really did appreciate just like the thorough, in-depth conversation about it, and just like how to integrate trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and restorative teaching practices. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate talking with you and just getting to know you as well, and then meeting you as well. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
This book is definitely another tool for your toolbox of teaching to make an impact in your classrooms. By using ideas like restorative justice and culturally responsive teaching, educators will learn how to help students develop emotional intelligence, improve students' knowledge, and confront personal biases in order to help all learners succeed. This book is available on our website, solutiontree.com. Look for Raising Equity Through SEL by Jorge Valenzuela. Now, for our sponsor message here at Solution Tree, we share your vision to transform education to ensure learning for all, and we can help you make this vision a reality. No other professional learning company provides our unique blend of research-based, results-driven services that improve learning outcomes for our students. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure to navigate to our solutiontree.com/podcast page to listen to our other episodes. There you can subscribe to our podcast today via the subscribe drop-down button to your favorite podcast app. Also, remember to like our episodes and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This has been your host, Prisma Lopez Marin. Thank you for joining us for Charting the Path in Pre-K through 12 Education.